Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here, as always, is to take these really complex stacks of information and try to distill them into something genuinely useful. And today, wow, we are diving into one of humanity's oldest, maybe thorniest problems, the problem of conflicting truth claims. I mean, if you've ever really stopped to think about it, you immediately run into this logical wall, right? You've got major belief systems, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, even some big secular philosophies, and they're all essentially saying their path, their core ideas, are the only correct way to see reality. Logically, though, if they make claims that cancel each other out, they can't all be completely true, can they? So for you, the learner, this brings up a really burning question. Are there any objective, kind of evidence-based tools we can actually use to assess these different claims? We're not really looking for absolute proof, maybe, but a structured, rational way to figure out what seems most plausible. Okay, let's unpack this. We're trying to find maybe a shortcut to rational thinking here, something that gets us past just picking what we like.
That desire for a framework, it's completely understandable. But first, we really have to get our heads around the sheer scale of the challenge here. Evaluating these systems objectively, whether it's a major world religion or a particular secular philosophy, is incredibly tough because, well, their deepest claims often involve transcendent realities. You know, things like the ultimate nature of reality, what happens after death, the existence of gods or non-physical beings. These claims are almost designed to resist simple physical testing.
Right. If you can't measure it with a thermometer or see it through a telescope.
Exactly. Then the standard tools of objective science just don't apply. They can't get a grip on it.
So does that mean we just give up, either fall back on pure faith, or maybe dismiss everything that we can't physically test as just baseless speculation? Is that the only choice?
Well, that's the trap people often fall into. If you demand this single, rock-solid justification for every single belief, like a definitive proof from scratch, you hit a well-known philosophical snag. It's called the Munchausen trilemma. Basically, it shows that any justification for a belief system inevitably ends up in one of three places. It either goes on forever, justifying A with B, B with C, endlessly.
Infinite regress.
Precisely. Or it circles back on itself, A proves B and B proves A. Or it has to bottom out in some arbitrary starting point, some axioms you just have to accept without proof.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no system can be proven beyond all doubt because they all need some kind of foundational assumption.
That's the core implication. So our goal here shifts. We're not hunting for some magic litmus test that proves one system right and all others wrong. Instead, we're looking for a robust set of parameters, tools drawn from fields like history and logic to assess relative coherence and plausibility. Got it. Okay, let's define the boundaries then. Let's start with what can be examined claims rooted in the observable world in the past. Our first objective category. Parameter 1, historical and empirical verifiability. Right. This parameter essentially says, if you make claims about historical founders, specific events, or revelations, those claims have to face external evidence. We look for corroboration. Do independent, non-religious sources mention this, like archaeology or texts from the same period? And we also check for internal consistency, making sure the story hangs together and avoiding obvious anachronism, things that are out of place for the time period.
Okay, I can see why that's powerful. For example, the basic historical claims about early Christianity, like the existence of Jesus and his crucifixion, these are things you can check against non-Christian sources from the first century, like Josephus or Tacitus. That gives you a starting point, an anchor in history.
Absolutely. Standard historical methods apply there. But contrast that with, say, some of the really ancient events described in Hinduism's early Vedic text. Because those stories were passed down orally for potentially thousands of years before being written down.
Finding independent contemporary proof is much harder.
Much harder, which, from a purely historical verifiability standpoint, makes those specific claims perhaps less solid than events with more immediate external documentation.
But here's where I get a bit stuck. If we accept Josephus confirming Jesus existed, why not accept the testimony recorded within the Christian tradition about the resurrection as equally valid evidence? It's still testimony, isn't it? Where's the line?
And that's precisely the boundary this parameter bumps up against. History is pretty good at confirming the setting, the main players, the general timeline, but it really struggles with what you might call singular transcendent events. Things like miracles, divine interventions, a resurrection. These events, by their very nature, aren't repeatable. They resist easy corroboration from people who didn't already believe. They sit outside the usual cause and effect chain that historians typically work with. Okay, that limitation makes sense. And it leads us nicely into parameter 2, empirical testability and predictive power. This feels like where science gets involved, demanding things be, well, Falsifiable. Exactly. Does the belief system make specific, testable predictions about the observable world? Things related to geology, cosmology, biology. If it makes a claim we can measure or test, it has to stand up to the evidence we have. The classic example that always comes up is literal young Earth creationism. Right. If an interpretation states the Earth is, say, exactly 6,000 years old, that's a very specific, very empirical claim. And it's falsifiable.
And it's one that runs directly counter to mountains of evidence from geology, cosmology, radiometric data.
Correct. And that contradiction, it doesn't necessarily disprove the core metaphysical beliefs of the faith, like the existence of God, but it does seriously weaken the credibility of that specific, literal interpretation of the texts. Similarly, if a system makes a concrete prophecy about a future historical event, and that event just doesn't happen, well, that diminishes its claimed predictive power and maybe its overall plausibility, too.
Okay, so far history can set the scene, science can potentially falsify some literal claims, but neither seems to really touch the core metaphysical stuff, the transcendent claims. It feels like we're only getting partway there. If the hard evidence runs out, where do we turn? We shift gears, we move to parameter set 2, focusing on logical and explanatory checks. If we can't test these core claims physically, do they at least make internal sense? This brings us to parameter 3, logical coherence and rational consistency.
Basically, a truth claim shouldn't violate fundamental logic, especially the law of non-contradiction. Something can't be both true and false in the same way at the same time. So we look for internal harmony. Do the main doctrines actually fit together?
Like, is it consistently monotheistic, or does it sneak in contradictions?
Exactly. And we also look at external alignment. How compatible is the system with what we generally know about reality from science and observation?
This is where you hit things like the famous problem of evil, isn't it? It seems like a huge logical hurdle for any faith claiming God is both all-powerful and perfectly good.
It's a classic challenge, yes. The existence of intense, seemingly meaningless suffering creates a potential logical contradiction there.
So the system needs a pretty robust explanation. Theodicy, you called it.
Precisely. It needs a sophisticated theological argument to resolve that apparent tension and maintain logical coherence. Coherence can also be a system's great strength. Think about Buddhism's core idea of impermanence, Annika.
That everything changes, nothing lasts.
Right. The idea that all composite things eventually break down. What's fascinating is how neatly that resonates with concepts from physics, like entropy, the natural tendency of systems towards disorder. It suggests a deep alignment in observing the transient nature of reality from both a philosophical and scientific viewpoint.
That feels like more than just surface agreement. It's like a structural alignment. But hang on, you mentioned earlier that some traditions, especially mystical ones, seem to embrace paradox, like the Trinity in Christianity. Doesn't that suggest logic isn't the ultimate decider?
It suggests logic has its limits, certainly, especially when dealing with concepts claimed to be beyond human comprehension. Logic is excellent for flagging inconsistencies and points of tension, but it might not be the only tool. That leads to our fourth parameter, explanatory scope and predictive power. This goes beyond just internal logic. It asks, how well does this belief system explain the big picture? Does it offer a compelling account for a wide range of human experiences, suffering, consciousness, morality, the universe itself? And does it do so better than competing explanations, perhaps with fewer arbitrary assumptions?
So we're kind of treating them like scientific hypotheses here, using, what was it?
Abductive reasoning.
Exactly, abductive reasoning. Seeking the best explanation among the available options. Take a monistic system like Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism. It proposes one single principle, Brahman, as the ultimate reality underlying everything. Consciousness, the physical universe, all of it. That's immense explanatory scope from a single concept. And we're also looking at its predictive power in a broader sense, right? Not just failed doomsday prophecies, but predictions about human nature or how people should live.
Yes. Does the system predict that following its path leads to a certain kind of moral improvement or transformation in people? And do we actually see that happen consistently among its adherents over time?
Okay. If a system consistently predicts, say, widespread peace or moral perfection through its practices, but that change doesn't seem to manifest reliably across centuries?
And that might undermine its long-term explanatory claims about human potential and transformation.
All right, so we've looked at history, empirical science, internal logic, and explanatory power. Now let's shift focus a bit, away from claims about the cosmos or the distant past, and more towards, well, the real-world impact. What happens when people actually live by these systems? This sounds like where we get into our final set of parameters, dealing with authority and practical results.
Correct. Our fifth parameter is credibility of testimony and authority. Since most religious traditions rely heavily on the testimony of key witnesses, prophets, founders, scriptures, we have to evaluate that testimony critically.
Yeah.
We use similar standards to how a historian or even a courtroom might assess a witness. How consistent is the testimony? How close were the witnesses to the actual events? Were they likely biased? Is there any corroboration from outside, non-adherent sources?
Can you give an example of what strong testimony might look like within a tradition?
Well, a commonly cited example is the transmission of the Quran in Islam. There's a strong emphasis on its textual preservation through memorization and these meticulously documented chains of transmission called isnad.
Right, you mentioned isnad.
Yes, and isnad is essentially this documented lineage of trustworthy narrators traced all the way back to the original source. That systematic approach to preserving the text is considered a major internal strength regarding the authority of the scripture.
But, I mean, even the most carefully recorded ancient testimony, it still lacks things like modern forensics, doesn't it? Especially for miracle claims. It seems like there's still a significant leap required to accept the content of that testimony, even if the transmission was careful.
Absolutely. There's an inherent limitation. We have to recognize that the evaluation method needs to fit the kind of evidence we actually have from that period.
Which brings us to our final parameter, maybe the most immediately relevant for many people, parameter 6. Practical and existential outcomes, or pragmatic efficacy, the by their fruits you shall know them test. Does practicing the system actually lead to positive, maybe even measurable results? Are we talking about things like improved mental health, more ethical behavior, maybe less violence in communities that follow it?
Yes, exactly. This gives us data points from sociology and psychology. For instance, there's quite a bit of research showing that practices like mindfulness meditation or certain types of prayer can lead to measurable benefits, reduce stress, better emotional regulation, often regardless of the specific theology attached. Or you could look at Jainism, with its fundamental commitment to ahimsa, nonviolence. Empirically, you often find very low rates of violent crime within dedicated Jain communities. That's a practical outcome.
But doesn't that just measure usefulness? I mean, we know meditation can calm people down. Does the fact that the practice works necessarily prove the whole metaphysical framework behind it? Like, does successful Hindu meditation prove the existence of Atman?
That is the absolutely crucial distinction. The success of an ethical guideline or contemplative practice demonstrates its utility, its effectiveness in promoting human well-being or social harmony. It shows the method has value. But, and this is key, it doesn't necessarily prove the underlying metaphysics. Good outcomes suggest the system has psychological or sociological validity, that it works for people on some level. But it doesn't automatically confirm the objective truth of its claims about God or ultimate reality. Right, correlation, not causation, essentially. And one quick follow-up on outcomes. What about mystical experiences? You hear reports from Christian mystics, Sufis, yogis, describing very similar states, feelings of unity, transcendence. Does that cross-cultural agreement count for anything? It's certainly suggestive, isn't it? It strongly points towards some kind of common, non-ordinary state of consciousness that humans can access, maybe reliably, across different cultures and belief systems. The big caveat, though, is always the interpretation. The raw experience itself might be profound, maybe even ineffable. But the meaning people assign to it, the truth claim they derive from it, I experienced union with God, or I realized the emptiness of all things, that interpretation is almost always filled through their existing beliefs. So the experience might be similar, but the resulting claims often remain conflicting. Okay, so we've laid out these 6 parameters: historical checks, empirical tests, logical coherence, explanatory power, source credibility, and practical results. Feels like a pretty comprehensive toolkit. It is. We've built this hopefully rigorous framework, but now we have to confront the big synthesis. If we have all these relatively objective tools, why does the problem of conflicting claims still seem so intractable? Why haven't we solved it?
Yeah, we have these robust categories for evaluation, but it feels like we still haven't landed on one single system that aces all the tests and definitively knocks out all the others.
And the fundamental reason, I think, is that these objective categories can't actually be applied in a completely neutral way. Why? Because you first have to agree on the rules of evidence. What counts as strong evidence? Different worldviews, different starting points, inevitably lead people to weight these parameters differently. A committed scientific materialist will likely prioritize empirical testability, P2, and logical consistency, P3, maybe dismissing testimony, P5, or pragmatic outcomes, P6, as largely irrelevant to objective truth.
Whereas a historian might put the most weight on parameter 1, the historical fallacies.
Exactly. And someone deeply involved in a practice, a practitioner, might find parameter 6, the system's power to genuinely transform their life and character, to be the most compelling evidence of all, far outweighing abstract logical problems or historical gaps. So this interdisciplinary approach, drawing from history, philosophy, science, sociology, it forces us to see that what looks like definitive proof to one person might seem like wishful thinking or just useful fiction to another, depending on their starting assumptions about what counts as valid evidence.
Which often leads thoughtful people towards, well, not necessarily picking one winner, right? Maybe towards pluralism, acknowledging strengths in different systems, or maybe a form of agnosticism.
That's often the outcome, yes. Recognizing that different systems might score well on different criteria, rather than finding one that universally dominates across all parameters.
So what does this all boil down to for you as the learner trying to navigate this? We've established these clear, objective types of evaluation: historical validity, logical sense, practical effectiveness, and so on. But we've also had to admit that how much weight you give to each type of evidence is deeply influenced by your own foundational assumptions, your worldview. So this framework, it doesn't hand you a simple answer. What it does, hopefully, is promote a kind of rigorous intellectual humility. You can now look at any truth claim and have a better sense of how to analyze it, where its potential strengths and weaknesses might lie, based on these different kinds of evidence.
And maybe this leads to a final thought to consider. Could it be that the very existence of these persistent, conflicting truth claims and the fact that purely external evidence seems unable to definitively resolve them, maybe that's not just a puzzle we haven't solved yet. Perhaps it's actually a reflection of something deeper. Maybe it reflects the profound mystery of existence itself and the incredibly diverse, unique ways that human consciousness is wired to try and make sense of and engage with that very mystery.